Hey guys, welcome back. You've got the tank cycling and a little downtime. So I thought I'd put together a quick video that just shows my past tanks. I'm an average hobbyist at best, but I've had a little bit of success and I've learned a few things along the way. So I thought I'd just kind of paint a picture of where I've come from, and hopefully that presents to you where I want to go with this new tank. And I do want to thank all of you for actually watching the video. I was surprised I got a few views and a few comments, and I really appreciate that interactivity and engagement. I hope that it continues. So thanks so much, guys, for watching. So this tank right here, this is your typical Petco, throw in some decor and rocks and fish and have at it type of tank. It was a 55-gallon tank. I was in school in undergrad. I was actually doing, I think it was grad school at the time. So didn't have a lot of money and was looking to do something to kind of take my mind off schoolwork and stress and trying to hold a job and things of that nature. And started this tank up and threw in some tiger barbs and had a really nice time with it and learned a lot. But the challenge was not too great, and I got quickly quite bored with that tank. But it was a nice introduction to understanding how aquariums work and function and should be cared for. So while that tank was running, to keep my interest level high, I gave a planted tank a shot. And this was just a small 10-gallon tank. I was mildly successful. It was nice to kind of experiment with the importance of lighting, so I had to get stronger lighting. I had to read about and research nutrients more and how you get these plants to grow. It looked more natural to me, so that was exciting. I have some driftwood in here and things of that nature. And so this little planted tank kind of gave me a new challenge. I really enjoyed this little tank for the time that I had it set up. I apologize, this is a terrible picture. But I always was longing for color, more color. Basically, I was longing for color of saltwater fish, but I was too intimidated and worried about expenses and things of that nature. So these two fish, these are electric blue Jack Dempseys. These were my first attempt at getting some coloration into one of my aquariums, and they cost a little more, right, than your tiger barbs, and they were a little bit more finicky and challenging to keep, healthy and alive. And they were quite small, so I put them in the small planted tank at first, and they did really well. And that gave me a lot of confidence that I could keep more difficult, expensive, challenging fish and also start to get some coloration into my aquariums. Now this picture right here, this is one of the cichlids I had. So my 55-gallon, which I originally showed you, and I'm sorry I don't have a full picture of that tank after I changed it over to a cichlid tank, but I took out the gravel and all the kind of silly decorations. I added sand, more natural looking a rockscape, and I got into cichlids. Again, I was going after color, and this is one of the prettiest fish, freshwater fish I was able to own and enjoy in my 55-gallon tank. Now this is my first attempt at a saltwater aquarium, and it is actually the 55-gallon original tank I had. As you can see, I mean, this is quite embarrassing to actually show, but I've come a long way, and I'm proud of that journey. So these, much of the equipment is hang on the back type stuff. It actually was a little sketchy. Some of it leaked at one point, and anyway, it was a disaster waiting to happen that I was able to prevent. But this tank, I invested in some decent T5 lighting with individual reflectors. Clearly, it was sumpless, and the rock structure it desires much more to behold. But I threw in an anemone. You can't quite make it out here, but a red acan, a Pacillopora, which those things don't get those. They lay mini frags throughout your tank and they become a pest. GSP, Xenia. So I had a mixture of corals, SPS, LPS, softies. I really didn't know what I was doing. I was learning as I went and adding a frag here or there that I could. And for the most part, everything lived, but growth was pretty slow. Then I upgraded to a 90-gallon tank. And so I had saved up a little bit of money. Some of those corals I had purchased for the 55-gallon started to flourish a little bit, so my confidence continued to grow. And the fish I had in the tank, my stocking went up. So I had a couple tangs, and so things were actually working really well in this 90-gallon tank. And I bought it used, so I saved a lot of money. It was drilled, which was nice. So I had a sump, and it really actually, I think, might have been one of my most successful tanks in terms of it just did its thing, right? I didn't have to use a lot of chemicals or do a lot of intervention or anything special to keep things alive and growing and flourishing. And I actually have some growth shots I'll show you here in a sec. That the corals actually grew quite well. So here's a shot underneath that tank. Quite a unique setup. I had a refugium on the right that trickled down into the main sump with just a pretty basic skimmer heater. I had a little filter sock in there. I had a little bit of live rock down there. My refugium was lit by just a Home Depot. I think it was a 6500 Kelvin light. So just super DIY, super simple. And that Kato or Chato, I don't know how people pronounce it. It just, I had to cut that stuff in half about every week, and I was feeding a lot. And the tank, I had very little algae in that tank, and corals were just growing, and so everything was just working well. I probably got quite lucky at this early stage with this tank. It ended up being one of my favorite tanks because of the success I had. So here is actually some growth shots of that tank. And this was about a year and a half in duration, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And you can see 3 to 4 is actually quite drastic. But as I just fed those fish, I didn't check nutrients. I don't even know what my nitrates were. There wasn't a lot of algae. So I just was feeding the fish, enjoying the tank. I was doing a water change, about 10% weekly, if that. I was trying to do that, but it probably was monthly. And the growth was just phenomenal. And the T5 fixture, I had ATI bulbs in there, but the fixture was just a no-namer. It wasn't a sun power or anything like that. And things just grew. It was phenomenal. And actually, I didn't really put my hands in the tank a lot. I didn't bug it a lot. I just fed the fish and watched those corals grow. And these are some of my favorite photos. I love progression or growth shots. They kind of just they're just fun to look back on, and kind of really excite me, because you grow these things from small frags to these huge colonies, and you just feel proud, right? I mean, you feel proud that you achieved this success, and you start getting to frag stuff and trade and sell, and it just takes the hobby to another level. So here, as you sell frags, you just get a little bit more money. I think I got my first decent camera, and I could take some decent pictures of some of the things in my tank. And here's just another fish. And so this tank was, as I think back to it, my favorite tank, the tank that cost the least amount of stress. And right here, this is actually a green spotted puffer brackish fish that I slowly acclimated to the salinity of my tank, and it was awesome to put in that tank. It didn't cause any trouble to my cleanup crew or anything like that. Real fun fish. If anything is close to a puppy dog, it would be this fish in my experience. So, they follow you as you walk up to the tank, and you can almost feed it out of your hand. I mean, just a fantastic little fish and a fun little fish to have. So I actually threw that in there and had a lot of success with that little guy. All right, here's a couple growth shots. So this is my ORA green bird's nest. I love this coral, mostly because of the growth pattern. So I got it as a small frag, and then it ended up getting, it moved on and lived on to a few other tanks, but it got to a near, probably basketball size before I had some problems with it. And it started to actually reseed and die off in the center. But it was one of my favorite corals in that tank that did really, really well. Here is a little red acan frag I picked up and just threw it in the tank, and I think it got well over 100 heads within the first year and a half. Here's a Recordia. I was on my sand bed. Again, I just thought it was a cool shot at the time and took a picture of it. Duncan colony. I had a couple head frag that I got, and it just grew like nuts. I fed it mysis shrimp here and there, but for the most part, I was fragging that thing, selling heads all the time. It was a beautiful, beautiful colony. Just magnificent, just huge. It was awesome. So this coral, this is where I learned a big lesson. So I kind of mentioned the last few corals. Hey, I just threw that in my tank and it did awesome. That mentality ran out. You can't just throw corals in your tank. So I learned from this coral that we have to dip our corals. We have to be very careful where we buy our corals, who we trade with, things of that nature, or we take risks. So this coral was actually the downfall of that 90-gallon tank. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to come back to it. I get a lot of satisfaction picking up a browned out coral or a pale coral or something that doesn't look too well, and seeing if I can get it to color up and really become more beautiful and really thrive. And I had a lot of success trying to do this, oddly enough, and I just loved it. So this is just one example where I had this kind of paled out SPS coral, some kind of millie, I think, and started encrusting a little bit, but with some time, with some nutrients in the water, with some stability, it just turned beautiful, right? These blue tips, and it was red and purplish, and it just was awesome. So that was something I was really interested in, is I would actually try to buy corals on the cheap because they looked poor, they looked brown, and I could get them for cheaper, and then I had confidence I could color them up. So back to this browned out coral I picked up, and I thought, oh, this is a bigger colony. This is going to be awesome. And you can see I had a little bit of success. It started to color up. But one thing I learned with some time is I noticed all of my other acroporos after this, it took about 3 or 4 months, had little white spots at the base. So your bite marks, right? And I took the turkey baster and I blew the coral, and sure enough, acropora eating flatworms blew off the coral, which is why it was browned out probably to begin with, and why it looked poor and the base was receding, etc. So I learned a very hard lesson that you can't just throw any coral in your tank. No matter how confident you are, it could come with pests, which could infect your other corals, which could become a living nightmare. I tried many things. I tried to regularly shoot the bottom of the coral with the power head, keep the flatworms off the coral. I got a Melanaris wrasse. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm not great with these names. And yeah, you could blow off the worms off the coral and the fish would eat them, but I never had any success with fish actually plucking them off physically off the base of your SPS corals. And I tried to live with them, like I said, but I just didn't like it. It also really bothered me because I didn't feel good about ever selling any more coral or trading coral, and so became this really stressful kind of annoyance that I just would look at my tank and I just felt like shoot, these are not the healthy corals; they're infected. But I know a lot of people do actually live with them, and maybe I overreacted a little bit at first. But as soon as I found out that I couldn't really get rid of them without a lot of dipping, I decided to break down the tank and go to a really small aquarium that would be more manageable for me to do a lot of dipping. And so some of the corals I didn't really love, I kind of threw out, and I just kept the corals that I really was fond of, and then those other corals that couldn't be infected by the flatworms, and tried to live with them and dip through this experience in this little small 33-gallon, very shallow but skinny long tank. And I had a little success in this tank, and it was kind of fun at the time. But that's kind of how I dealt with it and how my tank evolved. And I actually drilled this 33-gallon tank and had a decent sump and what have you, and did enjoy it. What was really nice about this tank is you don't get the armpit strain when you reach to the bottom of the sand. These shallow tanks are quite nice to work in. And you also notice I started to get a little bit more funding to go towards the hobby. I picked up an ATI SunPower T5 light fixture, so a lot more power. I threw on I was able to get an Ecotech Vortec pump, so that was kind of fun, and flow was tremendous in this little tank, and it was a very kind of a minimalistic look, not a lot of rock, and a very shallow sand bed. Just try to go for aesthetics and whatever was easiest and simple at the time, really, just so I could do a lot of repeated dipping of the corals I was worried about. And here's just a quick shot of the sump. Nothing crazy, but notice the paper towel roll, right? That's when you know you're a true reef junkie, when you got the paper towel roll on the cabinet door. And there's a couple shots. This is a yellow tang I had in that tank. A maroon clown. This coral here, I think this is a strawberry shortcake. It was just beautiful in that tank. It really thrived. I love that coral. So after a while, I felt that tank was too small, and I got through the dipping experience and getting rid of the flatworms and upgraded to actually, this is a custom tank I had built. I think this was a 65-gallon tank, so 4 foot wide, a little not super deep, but a little bit shallower than normal. And I went with halides here. So these are radium bulbs, single end, with 4 T5. So this is a Geisman, again, not pronouncing it probably well, fixture. So super nice fixture back in the day, and actually still to this day. It's actually a fixture that I got in white that's going to go in the new Red Sea Reefer tank that we're setting up here. So I'm excited about it. And I'll talk more about that light fixture in a future video and why I think it's awesome, awesome lighting. But this tank did pretty well, and I enjoyed it until I had to move on and leave I was in an apartment still at this time, and we actually moved into our first home. And so I broke that tank down. After getting to our home, I set up a 60-gallon cube. And it took a little while to set up. You know, when you first move into a home, it feels like you're just bleeding money. You got to buy a lawnmower. You got to do. There's always home repairs, and anyway, it was kind of a shock to me. And so it took a little while, and I had to have kind of a smaller tank. And I didn't get many pictures of this tank. This little shot and this kind of feed here, but it was a pretty mildly successful little tank, and I liked it. Okay, I didn't love a cube. I like a little bit more length for swimming room for the fish, so it was not the greatest tank in my preference, but it fed me. It fed the kind of the addiction I have to reefing, and kept me going and interested and into the hobby after I moved. And here's a shot of one of the corals in that tank. And anytime you can take a picture of your SPS coral, your Acropora, in the dark with lights not on, using flash, and you see some color, that's a good sign or observation that you know you're doing pretty good. And so this is just a comparison of what the coral looked like under lighting and what it looked like at night with just the flash on. So this tank here, this is the last tank I have owned, being in the hobby. So after a while, I think it was 2 years or so, that cube, I got rid of it, and I found a very, very inexpensive old Red Sea Max all-in-one tank. I wanted to use the tank to experiment and see if I could get used to LEDs, and they worked pretty well. I got a Reef breeder, a Photon, I think is what it was called, mostly because I had read some reviews that people liked the light, and it wasn't too expensive for me. And I know Adam over at Battle Corals, so I'm a big fan of him. He kind of gave the lightest thumbs up and said it worked well. It's a little bit of a silly picture. The light is so high above the tank. I was just so nervous about burning the corals, hearing horror stories about LEDs and how challenging they can be. But ultimately, they work just fine, and I had a good experience with LEDs. I think all lighting, T5s, LEDs, and metal halide work well and can grow coral, and they can look good. I think my favorite's going to be metal halide, which is what I'm going for with this new tank, the Red Sea Reefer G2 350. So I'm going to go T5 and metal halide combination, kind of old school. But it's what I love the most. It's the best shimmer to me, in my opinion, and it's grown the corals to the best coloration, in my opinion. So that's what I'm going to go for as long as I can. Once they stop making metal halide bulbs, I'll probably have to go LED, and I'll be fine. It'll work out well. There's beautiful tanks with LED as well. One, I suppose, crowning achievement of that last tank is I had a pair of Bangai cardinal fish, I think they're called, and I'm maybe, again, hammering the pronunciation. But they actually ended up pairing up in that tank, and this is a little baby fish that I just saw in the tank one day, and I noticed it was a little bit odd because the male wasn't eating for a while, and the bulge in his mouth began to grow, and I could see a couple fish inside his mouth. And anyway, it was fascinating. I had some success breeding Banggai cardinal fish. So, no credit to myself. Who knows why? I just got lucky, or maybe the tank was healthy enough, I suppose, that they were happy in there and doing their thing. So that was a pretty cool experience. Now, this last tank kind of had a sad ending, and it shook me a little bit. I struggled the last 6 months of that tank with dinos, or dinoflagellates. I call them dinos. They're my worst nightmare. They shook me. They kind of made me lose all confidence that I could keep a successful reef tank, and I still don't know to this day why they developed. Maybe it was the tank move from the 60-gallon cube. I disturbed the biome. I don't know. I tried everything. I tried lowering nutrients. In these pictures, I'm increasing nutrients. So you're seeing cyano and green hair algae mixed in with the dinos, and I just couldn't beat them. And coral started to be really unhappy and really recede and RTN, and it was kind of a sad ending, a disaster, if you will. And that's what ended that tank. Is I finally just got so frustrated, and I broke it down, and I took a break from the hobby. It's been probably 3 or 4 years now since I've had a tank. So I'm all in, starting this new Red Sea Reefer G2. I've invested quite a bit of money, into my perspective and in my opinion, into this tank. And I've read about dinos in the last 3 or 4 years, and people have new success stories and strategies to deal with them. So I think I'll be able to overcome them, I hope, if I get them, and I'm going to plan on getting them. That's the way this hobby goes, is you just have to accept you'll get these things, and you have to just work through them. Well, thanks again, everybody. That was a long video, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me, supporting me, liking, commenting, subscribing. I'm excited to bring you on this journey with me, and I hope it's a successful journey. Next video, I'm going to talk about the equipment I've brought in and the total cost I'm into this tank so far, and we'll break that all down. So appreciate you staying with me. Take care. See y'all. See you in the next video.